The eighth. The eighth man's face was framed by a beard that was as black as night except for its strands of grey. He wore a white head wrap like that of his brother before him. He was younger than his predecessor, and yet a certain tired age was in his eyes, as though he had known more years than his physical body would suggest. And yet his gait was that of an athlete, suggesting a physical strength that Torin had not seen since the second man. But she noticed in his body a hint of what she had seen in his eyes. Although his youth and movement suggested health, in some subtle way his eyes and body also spoke of fatigue. It was as if, for this man, time had reversed, but the scars of his age had remained. He spoke. "My brother has introduced you to our line, and so I will not speak with you of that. I will speak to you instead of my experience in the form you see before you. Like this long line of torch-bearers, I upheld the need for balance." The traveler responded with quiet voice. "From these men, 2 strands were produced. The first strand came from the second man and his view of the sky. The second strand came from the third man and his focus on the substance of the ground. Man has failed to see in each the other. So these 2 groups have fought for hundreds of years. Is it this of which you speak?" "It is," the man said. "Tell me your story," said the traveler. The man spoke. "My story is about balance. I learned much early in my life, to an extent so pronounced that I ignored when growing the world of my flesh. I was still young when my path of knowledge led me to the third of these men who stand behind me. He was my companion, though I did not know him until later. Throughout my life, blown like a lone foreign leaf across a hostile stretch of desert sand, I moved from place to place. I never learned to settle, except in the world of my mind, and that of my dreams, in which I conversed almost solely with many long dead. But nature seeks to fill empty space, and my mind, as a construction of nature, sought the same. It forced me to turn to the physical. Bodies can be touched, seen, smelled, and tasted. They are base, of graspable substance. This is what turned me from them. But as I learned, nature must be comprehended at all levels. It is not sufficient to start with the body while neglecting the mind, just as it is not sufficient to start with the mind while neglecting the body. Ultimately, they must be understood together. There is a segment of mind devoted to the body's experience. It has grown with the evolution of the body, tied to that existence by the very experience of which it is made. I knew nothing of it, and it was that ignorance which killed me. I understood how weakness in an aspect of a system can cause the breakdown of the entire system. Because of that, I promoted the active pursuit of balanced strength within the body, in its intake and in its use. To this end, I even laid down principles by which to achieve it. But in my own life, I was washed away by my need to satisfy my higher mind. I neglected the very same balance that I upheld. My early focus on the ethereal caused me to thirst not only for knowledge, but also for taste, smell, and touch. I overcompensated. In filling the void within myself, I came to destroy myself, just as a medicine, when overprescribed, might kill the very body it has been employed to cure. I became immersed in sensual gratification. But because gratification had been so long neglected, and because I, from my high place, could not understand the nature of its need, I fed it too fast, and thus broke the embodiment that allowed the higher pursuits of my mind. The traveler prompted the man. "So, you saw the embodied mind is not empty at birth?" The man looked at the traveler and thought for a moment before responding. "The mind fulfills itself through fulfilling the body, and the body does the same with the mind. My body is the image of my mind, of its aspects, both evident and hidden. No, the mind is not empty at birth. I found that by satisfying the needs of my body, I satisfied the needs of my mind. It was my body that taught me that my mind had requirements already instilled within it. My mind was represented physically in a way that would prove to highlight its own failings." The traveler spoke. "Because of my birth, I had the benefit of knowing the connection between the mind and the body. When I first met my own masters, there was none of the ambiguity you knew. Even had I not understood, I would have been taught as a child the truth. as would have been my companions. You had to learn these matters for yourself. Your teachers had this knowledge, but it was not crystallized for them. It was left for you to learn the body to the extent that you did, and to relate your learning to your understanding of your mind. The man spoke. It was only through failing to understand my body, while knowing it as well as I did, that I realized that, to me, a part of my mind had been hidden. I knew that the weakness was a representation of a part of my spirit, and that I could grow no further without attending to it. At that point, I knew that I existed not only to serve your father, but also to remedy that particular weakness so that my spirit could evolve. The traveler spoke. I understood from my father that the manifested exists both to satisfy its own evolution and that of all else to the extent of its influence. You understood that my father's task is to support a very particular evolution. Your evolution was incidental to his goal. The traveler stopped for a moment and then spoke again. Let me tell you of my father. For Torun, everything that was not her husband disappeared. She forgot the road, the grass, the sky, and the man. The traveler continued. First in the hierarchy beneath God are two siblings. These children, spirit and matter, represent birth and death. They are twins, female and male. Matter creates, spirit destroys. As their parents' children, their lives combine into the oneness of God. Their conjunction created a child called Time, who is neither male nor female. From Time came 3 daughters. The first, Iduna, knows possibility. She watches the past, oversees the spring of birth. The second, Kenna, knows struggle. She watches the present, oversees the spring of life. The third, Frida, knows uncertainty. She watches the future, oversees the spring of death. Together, these 3 weave the fates of the living. Time, in contrast to matter and spirit, is selfish. Time instills in matter's creation the awareness of change while hiding the nature of constancy. Time, jealous of matter and spirit, clings to what matter creates and is thus the source of the instinct in creation to survive, to counter the will of matter and spirit. Knowing only struggle and the fear of uncertainty, creation seeks to sustain what it knows. Spirit and matter brought forth another child, my father, to counter his brother Time. Now for eternity my father acts so that creation in the course of time may achieve what it would have achieved without the existence of time. The traveler paused and then said, Time is my father's brother, his nemesis. Time is the wraith. The man stared at him. But what of the distance between man and God? You place only 2 steps between God and your father's children on earth. The traveler responded, I did not place only 2 steps between. I merely defined only 2 steps between. And yet it is true that it was my father who whispered in your ear. But it was my father on this earth, the power he represents here, at this point in the universe. There are infinite manifestations of him between his parents and yourself. The whisper you heard was thus an infinitely limited aspect of his being. His parents gave him certain powers to act. They mandated the laws to limit his actions, carve them into his sphere. It is because of those laws that my wife and I exist. You have not met my wife. She is like the first of your forebears, born of my father by a woman. You are to her what she is to me, and she is to me what I am to my father. Like my father, I am a dynamic entity, encompassing more or less depending on my task. We must maintain a range of closeness to that with which we interact. Now perhaps you see why you were a perfect vessel for my father. His parents represent balance, and his sole purpose, the very essence of his existence, is to act against his nemesis in supporting the finding of balance by creation. He could see that the conjunction of your intellect with the space you occupied would cause your focus to attend to the unresolved matter within you. Your brothers were dear to him. You embodied the spirit of creation that epitomized the torch he gave to man. He did not want to lose you to time. I said earlier, he told me the manifested exists to satisfy its own evolution and that of all else to the extent of its influence. By whispering in your ear, he helped you to satisfy your own evolution, but he also saw the influence that you would hold. The maturity of your intellect meant you would be receptive to the very ideas that he needed man to uphold. He knew that your intellect would win man's attention and inspire him to choose to embody his true potential. My father's nemesis would rather make men into slaves. He has influenced men's spirit to unknowingly turn from spirit will. Despite your work, corruption shall cause man to employ your contributions in a way that shall destroy man and beast, and the health of the mother that feeds them. The artificial and inadequate teachings of your cousin's tradition, and the ignorance that shall come to rule your own, shall cause man to continue to turn his back on truth. By neglecting to face and appreciate the more subtle realities of his mind and body, man shall find, as did you, that his feet will be swept from beneath him. He shall find that his mind and body will rot. The effects will be obvious, but remedies will be avoided in the name of stability. They will be avoided because the only forces with the resources to achieve the remedies will be that very rot which itself should be excised. In the interests of self-preservation, that blessing of time, those forces will fight with everything they have to avoid meaningful, beneficial change. Man shall find himself with the greatest destructive power he has ever known. I am not referring to weapons and war, though he will develop those too. Rather, the destruction shall take a form similar to those diseases against which you spent your life in battle. It shall come from within, will manifest itself upon the surface of life in plain view. Mankind will come to resemble a tree with leaves riddled with a fungus or infested with insects. He shall represent as a sick animal, unable to exert the energy that any master would expect of a working dog. Exhibiting behavioral issues, he shall foul his own living space, shall be overly aggressive, emotionally needy, incapable of independence of mind. He will consistently demonstrate a lack of judgment, and instead will demonstrate, often and pervasively, stupidity and cruelty. The epitome of man's stupidity is that he allows himself to be ruled by institutions characterized by traits which, if found in a man, would have that man sequestered as dangerous. But the epitome of man's cruelty is that the actions of those institutions are always fundamentally the work of man. All of this is immediately apparent to a glancing eye, and yet remains unattended. And man, in protecting himself, will focus the entirety of his attention on issues that have no relevance to his survival. By the time he realizes how close he is to the abyss, the rot will have consumed him. And then, with nothing left to feed on, the rot shall turn and consume itself. That is the path you and your colleagues unknowingly fought against. It is a path which I have now come to prevent. The man bowed his head. For many years I treated the illnesses of man. He always did what he felt like doing. It seemed to me that he preferred to have his illnesses treated than to make those changes within himself that would bring health and prevent illness. I can see that you too are a physician. I hope for man that you are different from me, for I died, as did those patients whom I could not cure. I was as susceptible to my own sickness as they were to theirs. Torin wondered at this last statement, this veiled warning in the form of a hope. The man bowed his head again, turned and walked away to join the Ark of 12. As he took his place, the figure to his left stepped forward and approached.